Come on, 2, 3.
Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Monday, April 25th, 2022. And our top story today, how do you define retirement? Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Steve Vernon is the president of Rest of Life Communications. He worked at the Stanford Center on Longevity, and he's got a new book out called Don't Go Broke in Retirement. Steve, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Well, Jeff, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's a lot of titles there. You've done extensive work in the area of retirement for the duration of your career, actuary, working at Stanford, writing books, helping people. But I thought I'd ask you, let's start with the basics around what is retirement and how is retirement defined or redefined today? Because I had to think that things have changed dramatically for people.
Well, Jeff, you're right. And the old definition of retirement used to be a short period of not working at the end of your life. And my grandparents, for example, retired that way. They lived for about 10 years. And that's just the way everybody defined retirement. And often we have that expectation in our heads. But now with people living 20 or 30 years in retirement, first of all, it's not just a short period at the end of your life, but also doubling or tripling the period of retirement really puts a strain on the finances. And so the definition of retirement has definitely evolved. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine said, next year I'm going to retire and then work 3 days a week. And I thought, okay, that's your definition of retirement. So I think everybody needs to define retirement in the way that suits them.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And you know, we're going to talk about the impact of the pandemic throughout this conversation. But I want to ask you, do you think Americans are prepared financially, mentally, physically for this longer retirement? Let's start with mentally. It's a mindset, right? Being in retirement, you just mentioned your friend working 3 days a week as opposed to 5, 6, 7. Are they mentally ready to retire?
Well, a short answer would be no. I think people still have their grandparents' idea of retirement or even their parents' idea, and just not realizing the implications of living a long time in retirement. If you retire in your early 60s and you're married, one of you might live another 30 years. And that's a long time. And so what are you going to do with your life? Where are you going to live? Do you have enough money all that time? And I think the vast majority of Americans just have not let that implication sink in. And they retire for a variety of reasons. I mean, one, retirees love being retired. So, you know, if you're an older worker, you want some of that. You know, you don't want to have to wake up to the alarm clock. You don't want the stress of work. It's perfectly rational that people want to retire from their current work. But I like to say, really, ideally, you would retire to a life that you've envisioned and imagined, rather than retiring from some aspects of work that you don't like. And that's kind of a key piece of advice, is that if you have another 20 or 30 years in your life, you've got to imagine what that will be and then plan for that. And I could elaborate more, but that's kind of the short answer there.
Yeah, and let's talk about the transition because again, we'll talk about the pandemic in a minute and the impact there, but are there headwinds to this transition? You mentioned, talk about the mental aspect of things, but what about financial? You know, we've shifted to a defined contribution. There are some people that have great pension benefits, but for the most part, most Americans who work in the corporate world or not-for-profit world, they have to self-fund their retirement. So are there headwinds to making that transition today?
Yes, big headwinds. And that's actually what got me motivated in my Encore career, because for 30 years, I was a consulting actuary working on traditional pension plans. And I was really on the front lines of that shift. And I realized that this is placing a lot of responsibility on workers. to save and invest, but also manage that money in retirement. So here's the big headwind, is that I've seen the studies, and there are a number of studies that reinforce what I'm about ready to say. The vast majority of people in their late 50s and 60s have not saved enough money to retire full-time at age 65 under their current level of spending. Let me repeat that, because this is profound. The vast majority of older workers today don't have enough money saved so that they can retire at 65, never work again, and have their pre-retirement standard of living. And so the tough choices they face are either work beyond age 65 or reduce their spending, or some combination. These are hard choices for people to wrap their heads around, and they need help. And so that is one of the biggest headwinds facing people today, is just not really understanding the financial implications of a long time in retirement.
Yeah, and I think and we'll get into the who, how, why in a few minutes, but I personally believe that there's so much going on. Look, we've just been through a pandemic. We've all been working remotely. We were just talking about how you haven't been on campus in quite a period of time because of the pandemic. Are there some lessons, some takeaways for the retirement life that people are thinking about that we can take away from this pandemic, this work from home? We were also remarking about a very famous music venue near where you live in California that had to go kaput. That was a great place for socializing and seeing great music. So what are some of the lessons and takeaways from the work from home environment we're now experiencing pre and post pandemic?
There are good lessons. And when I say retirees might not need to work longer, you've got to acknowledge that's easier said than done, because a lot of individuals have resistance towards working longer. They may not want to, they may not be able to physically, employers may not want to hire them. So that's definitely a tough thing for some people. Having said that, the vast majority of young, early retirees, in other words, retirees who have just retired and they're in about 5 or 10 years into retirement, those are the folks who conceivably could work for a while. And almost all people want some kind of flexibility, reduced hours. And this is what the pandemic has taught employers, is that it is possible to have flexible hours, to have remote work. And so I think the pandemic has taught both employers and individuals it is possible. And that is indeed a blessing for people, pre-retirees and retirees who could conceivably work remotely.
Yeah, it's hard to find a silver lining in a pandemic where people lost their lives and were hurt, both from a health perspective, but also financial. But you're right. There's a lot of opportunity, and it's taught people maybe a new way of thinking. Steve, I want to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the transition to retirement. We've got some tips and a lot more. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score, a credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to Steve Vernon of Rest of Life Communication. Steve, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really welcome talking with your listeners.
Yeah, let's talk about those people. You talked about people who are younger retirees, but let's talk about people who are 5 to 10 years away. They're, I guess, what we would call in the business pre-retirees. So they're close. How can they ease themselves into a much better transition than, say, people who, maybe got downsized or got thrust into retirement because of the pandemic or some other reason?
Well, that's a great question, Jeff. And I said earlier that we could be living 20 or 30 years in retirement. And to do the right planning, pre-retirees face a daunting series of decisions. And these decisions are more complex and they have higher stakes than just, and I'm being a little facetious, just saving and investing for retirement. And so the sooner people get started on learning about these challenges and these decisions and learning what their options are, the better off they'll be. And so let me just suggest a couple of things that you could do, say 10 years out, is start understanding and envisioning what kind of life would you have? What do you want to do? Where do you want to live? Because that has an important influence on your life in retirement. And certainly understanding what I had said earlier, that trade-off between working longer and reducing your spending. Understanding that trade-off and start planning for it. And the reason I mentioned where you'll live is that if you need to reduce your spending, housing is your biggest target. And yet that also represents an opportunity, because if you've lived in that home in the suburbs where it's a great place to raise a family or commute into work, and that might be a good place in retirement when you're more isolated. And so I think people can really do a double or triple whammy by reducing their spending on housing, moving to some place where they don't have to get in a car and drive everywhere, and they can have their socializing or their working close by. And so I really encourage people to start envisioning their retirement 5, 10 years out and where they might live. And that gives them the time to think about it and just process all the decisions, because our research shows people's views evolve over time.
Yeah, they certainly do. And let's talk about work and retirement a little bit more, because often we hear about the cognitive decline that people may face in their later years. And I think a lot of that, research shows, and you're the expert here, but I think research shows that if you're not engaged with others, if you're not engaged in some type of productive work or something that engages your brain, you might lose that cognitive ability. Should we be planning? And we also hear, by the way, Steve, about the great resignation and how people just are going to resign and never work again. But should we be thinking more about working retirement? And when I say work, I don't mean schlepping to the office. I mean doing something that you love, like your friend going from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. Maybe he or she, maybe they're going to go work at a charitable organization. Maybe they're going to do some gig work. Maybe they're going to sew or knit, right? I mean, that maybe we should be thinking about retirement in that respect to support some of the things that you're outlining.
Well, yes. And let me share thoughts on that. And just let me first share, though, that everything I'll tell you is just not 100% provable by science. There's science that will give insights on that, but with all of the suggestions, it's increasing or reducing odds. And this whole thing about keeping your mind is of personal interest to me because both my father and his father, my grandfather, had dementia in their later years. I'm in my late 60s. You know, I feel that gun barrel pointing at me. And so I take this personally. And there is research that suggests being engaged with life somehow is somewhat protective against later life dementia. Not a guarantee, but somewhat protective. So I'll take it, you know. And you can be engaged with life by working or by volunteering or by being important to your family or your community. I really think that somehow having your mind scheming of how to make things better and planning and thinking ahead, that's what I think could give us some protection. If you want to see a book based on research on this, there's a book called The Mature Mind by Gene Cohen, which talks about these kinds of issues. And it's actually a classic in our field. So I'm a proponent of working longer, not only for the financial reasons, and there are tremendous financial reasons for that, but also just to keep engaged with life.
Yeah, really, really important points. You know, Steve, I couldn't let you go without mentioning a buzzword, and one of the biggest buzzwords and I hate jargon, by the way, but I'm going to use it here: retirement income. And I want to talk about this because this is a concept that I think is foreign to so many people, and we've talked about it throughout this entire interview, both this segment and the previous segment, where you have to understand what your investments, what the things that you've saved are going to generate in retirement. How do you parse through, not you, Steve, but how does an individual looking to generate income in retirement look at all these available products and parse through them to figure out what's suitable? And of course, we're not giving financial advice here, but just a guide. How do you as an individual go through all these different instruments to figure out what makes sense for you and your family?
Well, and that's an excellent question. And I like to start with what I call the magic formula for retirement security. And I'm having a little fun, but actually it's the truth, is that magic formula is I greater than E. And your income needs to be greater than your expenses. And so what I encourage people to do is set up lifetime paychecks that'll last the rest of their life, no matter how long they live, that they can rely on. Because I think most people have been used to the concept of a working paycheck, and then that dictates how much money they can spend, and it forms the basis for all their budgeting. So set up a series of lifetime paychecks, and now you know how much you need to reduce your spending if necessary. And so those paychecks, for the vast majority of our listeners, the biggest one is going to be from Social Security. And you can increase that paycheck by delaying the start of that until age 70. And then beyond that, the two other sources of income would be buying some kind of an annuity for those people who want more guaranteed income than Social Security. And then a third source would be just investing your money and having some kind of a systematic withdrawal scheme. And, you know, we're all used to the concept of a portfolio of assets, a diversified portfolio of assets while we're saving. And now I want to encourage people to think of a diversified portfolio of retirement income consisting of those three pieces. Piece it together and see which source makes sense for you and how they work. And then that's going to then drive these tough decisions I talked about, either working longer or reducing your spending or some combination. So I think really a lot of the planning starts with understanding the magic formula for retirement security.
Yep, and starting sooner rather than later. He's
Yeah.
the author of Don't Go Broke in Retirement. Steve Vernon, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Great, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
That wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest curated news and lifestyle, wellness, finance, tech, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. Want to see our latest content? Search our archives. Well, check out our website. And of course, our streaming partners, Amazon, Roku, Samsung. There's over 100 to choose from. We're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired,
Now is your opportunity to co-create content around any topic on the First Lifestyle and Wellness Network. Reach a global audience through our platform and co-own exclusive branded content. All of our programs are available on demand and also as audio-only podcasts, so you can take us on the go. Broadcast Retirement Network, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.